Okay, we've been talking about cockatrices, the phoenix, ancient dragons, making connections all through, serpent worship, all kinds of things. Here we can see a culmination of the Gnostics. If you'll look, this man is somewhat in an Orion pose. And again, he has that draped over his shoulder, which we would know as the golden fleece. But he's got a rooster for a head, and his legs are actually made of snakes, but they terminate in the heads of rams in this ideogram that we see here, known as Yao, as in Yahweh. Let's look into this Abraxas and its ancient Gnostic knowledge. Abraxas is Romanized as Abraxas, but its previous form was Abraxas. And there's that Sax word that has to do with the Saxons and also had to do with Isaac. It's a word of mystic meaning in the system of Gnostic basilids. And this has to do with the basilisk. This is a creature like the cockatrice that was said to turn men to stone, or women too. If you look at some of the Greek statues, you can get an idea of this idea. I remember seeing Clash of the Titans whenever I was a kid, and they kind of gave this identity that the statues that were there in Medusa's lair were all really not just statues, but they were people in poses that got caught and turned to stone. Well, what was the reality of that whenever I looked into it was that they had a lot of these mystic tales that went from ancient times in different forms than each other, or sometimes quite often containing a large portion of the same story in other ones that got flipped back and forth. And it led me to the idea that because of the timelines that I was looking at here, this is something that was kept and changed and kept and changed. And through that time, it was adopting in what they had of a similar belief system and making more of it. Quite often when I do things like this, people act like, oh, you're killing Jesus and you're doing this. I'm trying to show you that there's more to it than ever met the eye. Things that whenever I was growing up, I was just talking to a friend of mine, and he brought up the fact that things that we were taught back in the 70s aren't even described or spoken of, really. It's all ambiguous now. So it had to do with the basilisk that was there and turning this religion to stone and making it concrete. You can see that idea in that. Being there applied to the Great Archon, Megas Archon. This would be the God of all, or the origin of everything, the one. The precepts of the 365 spheres known as Oranoi. And make no mistake, that number has to do with our days of the year. The word is found in Gnostic texts such as the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit. The Great Invisible Spirit is what we have as our gods, depending on whichever one you're talking about. The ghosts of ancients, of pasts that were deified and kept. Some from long, long ago. So long ago, people don't even remember the origins, but they know the ideal that goes with it and the concept, and so it grew into what we have today. It also appears in the Greek magical papyri. Yes, this has to do with magic and magi, which is where magicians came from. This is not of a sleight of hand trick either. It was engraved on certain antique gemstones, called on that account Abraxas stones, which were used as amulets or charms, as the initial spelling on stones was Abraxas, which got Romanized and Latinized into Abraxas. The spelling of Abraxas, seen today, is probably originating in the confusion made between the Greek letters sigma and psi in the Latin transliteration of the words. It may have been done on purpose, too, because some of these ancient words got to the point where they weren't supposed to be spoken or written down. Like you hear in the Bible about Yahweh and things, they've got to keep it all a big secret. But then you've got to believe in this secret that we're not going to tell you all the things about, and I think that is selfish and quite telling in another way. The 7 letters spelling its name may represent each of the 7 classical planets. The word may be related to abracadabra, although other explanations exist. Yeah, the ancient name for the sun and the moon and Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on, you can actually make up that name right there. The Sacred 7, something we've seen showing about through all kinds of literature. So it really has to do with our cosmos, and it has to do with astro-theology, as really all of this and its essences did, and sun worship and so on. I also say that it may be related to abracadabra, and that's a magic word, and it actually means that I will create like a god. I will create this. I will make this happen. And they say that right before they pull the veil back and show you that something has happened. The magic has happened. When I was a kid in high school, Abracadabra was a famous song by Steve Miller Band. It was one of his later hits after he had already had Fly Like an Eagle and Swing Town and all kinds of other hits. There are similarities and differences between such figures and reports about Basile's teaching ancient Gnostic texts, the larger Greco-Roman magical traditions, and modern magical and esoteric writings to this day. Speculations have proliferated on Abraxas in recent centuries, who has been claimed to be both an Egyptian god and a demon. Of course, if it doesn't go along with their thoughts, it's easy to try to demonize somebody, even what people thought were gods. If it doesn't go along with the current thing, then you have to demonize it. But I've done videos on demons and show you that's where bad spirits and all these ideas that go along with it, and there had to be a yin and yang. If there's a heaven, there had to be a hell, and there had to be a hierarchy with that situation too. Let's look a little deeper. You know, the etymology of the word here, Gaius Julius Hyginus gives Abrax, Aslo, Theribo as names of horses of the sun mentioned by Homerus. Now, these are the horses that pull the sun across the sky. Of course, this is after the point that horses have been brought to humanity. Before that point, they used different creatures. Some of them were still kept after that point, but a lot of them changed into horses. The ancient god of horses was Poseidon or Neptune. The passage is miserably corrupt, they say, but it may not be accidental that the first 3 syllables make up Abraxas. So that actually may be Abraxas, Lo, Theribo. And originally there were 2 horses. For you notice there it gives you 3, and now we know that it's a 4-horse chariot. This is a symbolic thing also. Attempts to discover a derivation of the name, Greek and Hebrew, Coptic, or other names have not been totally successful. Some people find that it's a double conflagration, that one is Proto-Indo-European and the other one is languages from the ancient Middle East. As far as Egyptian goes, Claudius Salmanus in 1588 through 1653 thought it to be Egyptian, but never gave the proofs of which he promised. He just had an extreme inkling because some of the things that he had saw, but he never did write down and say, this is it, this is that. J.J. Bellarmine thinks it's a compound of the Egyptian words Abrac and Sax, meaning the honorable and hallowed word, because we're talking about words and sacred words there. Or the word is adorable, but not thought of like a puppy. To adore something, to revere it, so on. Samuel Sharp finds it an Egyptian invocation to the Godhead, meaning hurt me not. All of these somehow fit. In Hebrew, Abram Geiger says that it's a Grecicized form of Ha Barak Ha, the blessing, a meaning which C.W. King declares philologically untenable. J.B. Passeris derives it from Ab, which means father, Bara, which means to create, as what's seen in the other word before, Abracadabra, and a negative, meaning the uncreated father. This would also show you that they had to create someone like Jesus to fill off the role. But strangely, we have that Jesus figure in all other religions surrounding it. Celts, Proto-Indo-Europeans, through India. It really embraces a much, much bigger space. But then to put them all together and configurated as one is that next creation step. Giuseppe Barzilai goes back for an explanation to the first verse of the prayer attributed to Nehunya bin Hakanan. So it has to do with Canaan. The literal rendering of which is, O God, thy mighty right hand deliver the unhappy people. Forming from the initial and final letters of the words, the word abracad, with the meaning the host of the winged ones. So, angels. While this theory can explain the mystic word abracadabra, the association of this phrase with Abraxas is uncertain. In Greek, Wendelin discovers a compound in the initial letters amounting to 365 in numerical value. So, in Gematria, where each letter has a numerical value, kind of like the game that we play with Scrabble, and each one and certain letters get certain values, of 4 Hebrew and 3 Greek words conflagrated together, all written with Greek characters: Ab, Bin, Ruach, Hakabs, Soteria, Apo, Xilu, Father, Son, Spirit, Holy, Salvation from the Cross. According to a note of Isaac bin Besorteb's, Yin Hardun accepted the first 3 of these, taking the 4 others from the initials of the Greek Anthroposon Hagoi Xyloi, which is saving mankind by the cross. Kind of very similar. Isaac Besoré derives Abraxas from the Greek Habros and Sao, the beautiful and glorious Savior, bright and shining one. Perhaps the word may be included among those mysterious expressions discussed by Adon von Hammack, which belong to no known speech, and by their singular collection of vowels and consonants give evidence that they belong to some mystic dialect, or take origin from some supposed divine inspiration. Perhaps some of these letters were used by all these different civilizations, and they were letters of gods, and you put it all together. The Egyptian author of the book, The Mysteries, in reply to Porphyry, admits a preference of barbarous to vernacular names and sacred things, urging a peculiar sanctity in the languages of certain nations, as the Egyptians and Assyrians in origin, in contracels, refers to the potent names used by Egyptian sages, Persian magi, Indian Brahmins, and of course we've shown there's connections to why those would have a common belief, signifying deities in the several languages. Sources: it's uncertain what the actual role and function of Abraxas was in the Basilidian system, but they were certainly adopting it. As for our authorities, show no direct acquaintances with the doctrine of Basilides himself, and that would show it to be an adoption, like we're saying. So let's view Abraxas as an archon. In the system described by Irenaeus, the unbegotten father is the progenitor of Nous. From Nous Logos, from Logos Phoronis, like pharaohs, and Phronos Sophia, which is a goddess of wisdom, and Dynamis. From Sophia and Dynamis principalities, powers, and angels, the last of whom create the very first heaven. They in turn originate a second series who create a second heaven. The process continues in like manner until 365 heavens are in existence, one for each day of the year. The angels of the last are visible heaven, being the authors of our own world, the ruler, principality, probably an archon, of 365 heavens, is Abraxas, and for this reason he contains within himself 365 numbers. Nous, as we talked about before, or Noos, kind of like Noah, sometimes equated to intelligent or intellect, is a term from classical philosophy for the faculty of the human mind that is necessary for understanding what is true and real. English words such as understanding are sometimes used, but three commonly used philosophical terms, one of them was nous. It's an album when I was a kid called Entre Nous. So, the name occurs in the Refutation of All Heresies by Hippolytus, who appears in these chapters to have followed by the Exelica of Basilides. After describing the manifestation of the gospel in the Ogdoad and Hymdoad, he adds that the Basilides have a long account of innumerable creations and powers in the several stages of the upper world, or dia stemmata, made of two words, dia, as in a god, and stemmata, the stem, in which they speak 365 heavens and say that their great archon is Abraxas because his name contains the number 365, the number of the days in the year, i.e. the sum of the numbers denoted by the Greek letters making up the word Abraxas according to the rules of Isephi or Gematria. A is 1, B is 2, P is 100, A is equal to 1. Again, E is 200, A is 1 again, and sigma is 60, and if you add that together, that's 365, and how many days in a year. These were things that were known, and people used to be controlled by certain knowledges that now are so common knowledge that they've flipped this entire concept, if you'll look at it. But as a god, Abraxas. Ephaneus appears to follow partly Irenaeus, partly the lost companion of Hippolytus. He designates Abraxas more distinctly as the power above all and the first principle, the cause and first archetype of all things, Abraxas, and mentions that the Basilidians refer to 365 as the number of parts or melee in the human body as well as in the days of the year. This is a sacred connection. The author of the appendix to Tertullian, De Prescure Hair, who likewise follows Hippolytus's companion, adds some further particulars that Abraxas gave birth to mind, or nous, the first of the series of primary powers, enumerated likewise by Uranus and Ephaeus, that the Word and the world, as well as the 365 heavens, was created in honor of Abraxas, and that Christ was sent not by the maker of the world, but by Abraxas himself. Something totally different if you think about it, but if you think about it also in the Bible, where it all starts out, when it comes all the way through creation, Adam and everything, and Abraham, they're in between Tigris and Euphrates, in an area there, and Abraham leaves. Now, when he does, it clearly states that they went elsewhere and started worshiping other gods. But in your Bible, it's conflagrated as an idea that this must be the same one, but in that knowledge right there, you see it's not. There's also a connection with Abraham to Abraxas. If we take Ham out of that situation and say, well, that really is something we made up after, too, Abraxas has a connection to Abraham, but it would have to do with something that's Isaac or the Saxons and other connections there too. The father of the Saxons is what it would come out to. Taking a little break here, we're going to look at a picture here where this is Abraxas carved on an obverse and reverse of it here, and you can see that on the left hand side he has that symbology where his legs have been turned to snakes. Now, there's an ancient tale of Demuzi, where whenever he was trapped in hell and trying to get away and in shackles, he couldn't get out, and he prayed to Enki and the gods to make his feet, or to free him from it, and they made his feet turn into snakes. This is a conflagration of idea that whenever you see this, you're supposed to make a connection. There's another connection too that Robert Seppert made a pretty good video on here of Melusine, for it's a semi-counterpart female to this, where it's the woman that has the legs that coil like this, and they turn into snakes. Some people don't know what I'm talking about. Other people have never really looked at the symbol that makes up Starbucks coffee, because that is the exact symbol. On the right side here, you can tell that it's a snake serpent that's woven up, making a figure 8 in the center, which is an affinity symbol. Infinity. Has a halo around its head, but has somewhat of a chicken head again on it. To the right are 3 partridges. Below that are 3 snakes. On the left-hand side, there are 3 horses, and below that are 3 alligators or crocodiles. The lower ones are the symbols of the earth and the underworld. The birds and the horses are the symbols of life and mankind on the planet and up into the heavens. Notice that at the top of this, they have 3 different crowned figures that are on this too, commemorating this one. It's like the idea that the 3 wise men came, but where did they come from? Well, they came from the east. Let's get back into this here. It's another symbol that somebody showed of Abraxas. If it was to be some type of demon, you can see he has a tail coiled and then has a coin attached to the very bottom of it, and his legs are pretty much normal except for when they get down to the ankles and it turns into snakes there. Seems to be somewhat greedy here with a effigy that's shown in his right hand, that he's got it. And if you look at his mannerism of the way he looks, you might be able to tell the ethnicity that they were probably trying to make fun of at this point. This is from 1863. People knew about all these things and kept it sacred and talking about it all the way up until a modern time, and we seem to have just let it drift away. I'm here to blow that veil back and still give you another look at this type of thing. So nothing can be built on the vague illusions of Jerome, according to whom Abraxas meant for Basilides the greatest god, showing you that they actually had multiples. See, like when they call God the Most High, they're saying there's a lot of other ones, but then He's the Most High, the highest God, the Almighty God, the Lord, the Creator. The notices of Theodoret, Augustine, and Praedonastus have no independent value. It's evident from these particulars that Abraxas was the name of the first of the 365 archons, the original, and according stood below Sophia and Dynamis and their progenitors, but the position is not expressly stated, so that the writer of the supplement to Tertullian had some excuse for confusing him with the supreme God. Being in that first position, too, he'd also be coming up from behind with the last position, and when we conflagrate all 365 of them, you're to worship him every day, because every day is a coming of the sun, and there's nothing different that comes on as a difference between the height or lowness of winter at December 21st, where it stops for 3 days and doesn't rise or go down. They say it's dead, and then rises again 3 days later to start bringing us into spring and summer again. As an aeon, like the picture I showed you a minute ago, with the availability of primary sources such as those in the Nag Hammadi library, the identity of Abraxas still remains unclear. The Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, for instance, refers to Abraxas as an aeon dwelling with Sophia in wisdom, and other aeons in the pleroma, in the light of the luminary Eleth. In several texts, the luminary Eleth is the last of the luminaries, or spiritual lights, that come forward, and it is the Aeon Sophia, associated with Eleth, who encounters darkness and becomes involved in a chain of events that leads to the Demiurge's rule over this world, and the salvage effort that it ensues. As such, the role of aeons of Eleth, including Abraxas, Sophia, and others, pertains to this outer border with the pleroma that encounters the ignorance of the world, of lack of intellects, to rectify the error of ignorance in the world of materiality. Well, if they keep trying to profess stupid things to you and don't give you understanding, they're making that happen in dissent, and so it tries to just mull it all over as, oh, what is that, rather than something that we had well defined. Abraxas as a demon. The Catholic Church, of course, later deemed Abraxas as a pagan god, but theirs wasn't, and ultimately branded him a demon, as documented in J. Colin de Flancy's Infernal Dictionary. You see, because pagan just really means agriculturist, and everybody they were talking about were agriculturists. Abrax, or Abraxas, is labeled the supreme god of the Basilidians, which has again to do with the basilisk, whom he describes as heretics of the 2nd century. This is when they were trying to get the Bible all together here in the 1st, 2nd century, and 3rd, and Council of Nicaea and so on happening after this, and then it was put in stone. They were trying to get it put in stone. He further indicates the Basilidians attributed to Abraxas the rule over 365 skies or days, or 365 virtues. In a final statement on Basilidians, de Plancy states that their view was that Jesus Christ was merely a benevolent ghost sent on earth by Abraxas. Now, that doesn't go with what your beliefs that you're being taught in a modern time about Jesus, or is it? He was just a ghost. In fact, they go well out of the way to show that he was never a ghost, and after he died, he was never a ghost. Even Doubting Thomas, which shows you Jesus actually had a twin brother, had to inspect him. Abraxas stones. A vast number of engraved stones are in existence to which the name Abraxas stones has long been given. One particular fine example was included as part of the Thetford Treasure from 4th century Norfolk, England. The subjects are mythological and chiefly grotesque, with various inscriptions in which Abraxas often occurs, or Abraxas, alone or with other words. Sometimes the whole space is taken up with the inscription. In certain obscure magical writings of Egyptian origin, Abraxas is found associated with other names which subsequently accompany it on gems carved into it. It is also found in the Greek metal tesserae, among other mystic words. The meaning of the legends is seldom intelligible, but some of the gems are amulets, and the same may be the case with nearly all. When I see that word tesserae, I always think of a tesseract, which is mid-geometry term and so on else, but actually in Dungeons and Dragons, it's something like a conflagrated dragon type of creature, a tesseract. It's kind of Godzilla or something like that you go off of. The Abraxas image alone, without external iconisms, and either without or but a simple inscription, the Abraxas imago proper is usually found with a shield and a spear or wrath and a whip, which I've shown you in the very first picture, a sword or a scepter, and a cock's head. So here we are back on chickens again. The body clad with armor and serpent's tail. There are, however, innumerable modifications of these figures: lions, hawks, and eagles' skins, with or without mottos, and with or without a trident and a star, or with or without reverses. Abraxas combined with other Gnostic powers. If in a single instance this supreme being was represented in connection with powers of subordinate rank, nothing could have been more natural than to represent it also in combination with its emanations, the 7 superior spirits, or the planets, the 30 aeons, and the 365 cosmical genii. We talked about genies recently. And yet this occurs upon none of the relics as yet discovered, whilst those powers not belonging to the Gnostic system are frequently met with. Abraxas with Jewish symbols. This combination predominates not indeed with symbolic figures, but in the form of inscriptions such as Yao, Eleoi, which is plural, Adonai, which has to do with Adonis, and I'm about to do a video that's connecting that and Tammuz and their ancient connections. In fact, showing you that Wiki itself here has changed, where I made a video about that 3.5 years ago now, and the connections there, and I had to jump through all kinds of hoops and go 6 different places, and now it's pretty much all kept in one area all together, showing you that there is that connection, and it's undisputed. Adonai, Sabaoth, archangels like Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Oniel, and Nanoet, Raphael, Japliel, and others, which all contain the name El. El was the god of the patriarchs of the Bible. He's worshipped in a temple. They had lots of angels. Every one of them has El as the end of its name, showing you that. And Nanoel, but what's that got to do with it? Well, that's got to do with Anat, as in Anatolia, and where it came from, its name. That's still kept somewhat today, but then it's been conflagrated. Asia Minor is one, but they call it Turkey now because of a much more modern occurrence. The name Yao, to which Abraxas is sometimes added, is found with this figure even more frequently than Abraxas or Abrag itself, and that they are often combined. So really it's a double, saying that Yao or Yahweh is Abraxas. They're also found often with the divine names of Sabaoth, Yao, Yao Abraxas, Adonai Abrax, etc. They don't want you to know that happened. Abraxas with Persian deities, chiefly, perhaps exclusively, in combination with Mithras, and supposedly a few specimens with the mystical gradations of Mithraica upon Gnostic texts. So it's caught there too, but there's a lot of Mithraicism in this dying and rising God type thing, and we'll look at that again in that Adonis Tammuz video that I'm about to make. But that's for another video coming up. Abraxas with Egyptian deities. You see, it's represented as a figure with the sun god, Phre, leading his chariot, or standing upon a lion borne by a crocodile, also a name in connection with Isis, Ptah, Neith, Athor or Hathor, which we talked about, Thoth or Thoth, Dehuti, the god Anubis, Horus, and Hippocrates in a lotus leaf. Also with the representation of the Nile, the symbol of prolifercy. And with Agnathodemon, Knuphis, are with scarabs, the symbol of the reviving energies of nature. And I did a video about scarabs and its connections recently to rebirth and this whole concept. Abraxas with Grecian deities, sometimes as a figure and again with the simple name in connection with the planets, especially Venus, Hecate, and Zeus, which were richly engraved. Simple or ornamental representations of the journey of departed spirits through the starry world of Amenti. Oh, we're getting deep there. It was borrowed, and as those above named, from the Egyptian religion, the spirit wafted from the earth, either with or without the corpse, so the Ba and the Ka type, and it's transformed at times into Osiris or Helios, Jesus Christ or the Sun. But notice that Helios has hell as its beginning too. Is depicted as riding upon the back of a crocodile or a lion, guided by some instances by Anubis and other genii, and surrounded by stars, and thus attended hastening to the judgment and a higher life, zipping off into that afterlife. Representations of the judgment, which, like preceding, are either ornamental or plain, and imitations of Egyptian art with slight modifications and prominent symbols, as the vessel in which Anubis weighs the human heart, as comprehending the entire life of man with all of its errors. Worship and consecration services were, according to the testimony of Origen, which has to do with the religion we're in now, in his description of the Ophiatic diagram conducted with figurative representations in the secret assemblies of the Gnostics, unless indeed the statement on which this opinion rests designates. As it readily may, a statue of glyphic workmanship, and it's uncertain if any of the discovery specimens actually represent Gnostic cults and religious ceremonies, although upon some of them seem to be Abraxas figure lying its head upon a person kneeling as though for baptism or benediction. Ding! Astrological groups. The Gnostics referred to everything as astrology, even the Bardinians, located in the inferior powers, the 7, the 12 and 36 among the planets, 12 in the zodiac and the starry regions, as rulers of the celestial phenomenon which influence the earth and its inhabitants. We're all caught in a snow globe. Birth and health, wealth and allotment are considered to be mainly under these control. Other sects betray still longer partially for astrological conceits. Many of these specimens are also improperly ascribed to Gnostics, but the Gnostic origin of others is too manifest to allow of contradiction. Sounds like a lawyer just wrote that there, but what they're saying is, although a lot of these that were found that are supposed to be attached to our religion have been just pretty much shoved off to the side and said, oh, that was Gnostics, that was pagan. Inscriptions, of which there are 3 kinds, those destitute of symbols or iconisms, engraved upon stone, iron, lead, or silver plates, in Greek, Latin, Coptic, or other languages of amuletic import and the form of prayers for the health and protection. There are also those with some symbol as a serpent in an oval form. That's an Ouroboros. That's where a snake is going around and biting his own tail, which they used to say was its rebirth, and how they formed each other. And of course, back then there was the snake type of worship, and you can see that with Gilgamesh and how they were trying to. Well, he couldn't actually go through the rebirth ceremony, so the best they could do is give him a fountain of youth type situation, with the snake ran off with and promptly shed his skin, and there's a connection that goes with that. But the Gnostics realized that a lot of this was all astro-theological, and in fact state that it was all. There's also those with iconisms, at times very small but often made of the prominent object, so that the legend is limited to a single word or name. Sometimes the legends are as important as the images themselves. It is remarkable, however, that thus far none of the plates or metals found seem to have any of the forms of prayers reported by Origen. It's necessary to distinguish those specimens that belong unto the proper Gnostic period, from which such things are indisputably or later origin, especially since there is a strong temptation to place those more recent date among the older class. So let's look at a few representations here of the way it looks. And so you can find something that really just looks like a solar deity here with the spikes on his head, or an aura. But a lot of the other pictures that are shown are very much in that rooster having the snake half body and so on. And here's that 4 horsemen that's here. I think we'll end this right here, as it comes on 45 minutes. Let me know what y'all think down below. But there is more to this. Peace.